website. The future of false accusations is here. Only in this future, the line between truth and falsehoods has blurred dramatically. So in a time when anyone could be set up to say anything, remember to take everything with a grain of salt. If a public figure says something outlandish, take the time to look into it. Do your research. Because while technology can be used to transfer information more efficiently, it can also be used to transfer information incorrectly.
About, and throughout the evening we'll be talking about gubernatorial races, senatorial races, and other candidates that you'll be hearing about. Many of the names are very popular. Some may not be known at all as their secondary candidates. But we're talking primarily about the towns in greater Danbury area, Danbury, Brookfield, plus some other runs out into Southbury, Woodbury, and Waterbury. But in the meantime, Jason, Dave, and Richard will keep us up to date with everything else.
You can tweet us in at Election Connection, Election CT, and call us at 203-837-9182. Let's get started. One of the most pervasive observations you hear today is how divided the nation is, how partisan we've become. Is it really any different from any other time or election year? What do you think, David?
It definitely seems like the country is a lot more divided, and we've seen the rhetoric coming from both sides. Nobody really wants to talk to each other. The issues are so divided and varied that there's really no common ground between the two parties.
Now, do you think that we've kind of reverted back to a time in previous years, maybe not recent years, but a time when it was very partisan in our country?
Well, we've seen the same thing a few times before, especially considering the 2010 midterm elections when we had the Tea Party movement and whatnot. So it's not completely unprecedented. The question is going to be this year, do we have a blue wave? I think that's the biggest thing everybody's asking.
And Richard, what's your thought on the subject?
Well, when we were talking before, I think this partisan goes way back maybe 1850s, 1870s, back during the early penny press era, back during the Reconstruction era. People were a lot more vocal, a lot more divided. They were nasty. And so here we are back again 100 years later doing the same things they did back in the early days of our country.
Do you think there's going to be something that'll maybe bring us together, possibly in this election season?
I don't really know. It's really hard because I think we went too far over one way or the other. I think if something comes, it's going to have to be some national tragedy. Maybe another couple hurricanes, maybe a big earthquake, something that's going to bring us all together. But I don't think politically there's anything on the horizon that's going to do it. I think it's going to have to come from the outside.
And what are your thoughts on that, David?
Well, I really hope we don't have a situation where some cataclysmic event is what it takes to bring the country together. I'm hoping that rationality and reasonable discourse will bring us back together. Currently, it seems like there isn't a platform to have that discussion, though. We see a very biased media for the most part. We also have the issue of fake news, which is confusing people. So when it comes to discussing many topics, people don't have the right material to work with to have a reasonable discussion.
I agree. That's one of the problems right now. How do we define fake news? How do we find what is the truth? How can we both discuss things on an equal basis? That's one of the things that I'm promoting for myself for this run for governor, if you haven't noticed. We have to do things equally. If you're going to attack one side and go into in-depth detail of all their faults and all their things, like, I hate to bring this up again, but Kavanaugh again. If we want to find out what he did in high school, then we should also do the same thing on the other side to Christine Ford. And that way, this is the only way we're ever going to come to any kind of a mid-ground in here, is if we treat both sides equally. And that even includes when you get into more serious issues like police shootings and things of that nature, economic problems. Why can't we discuss both sides equally? Because after all, that's what we were raised to do.
Well, President Trump is known for his criticism of the press. Here's what one self-pressed enemy of the people had to say.
So I welcome the opportunity to speak with you today because, frankly, it has offered me a chance to step back from the literally hourly craziness and reflect a bit on what has gone on over the last 20 months. Given the pace of events, the new normal, which let's remember is not normal at all, has allowed for startling little reflection by any of us. We have fallen into a pattern in which the President and his accolades attempt to own each news cycle, and those news cycles seem to last about 2 hours, by making a statement so outrageous and often so at odds with the truth that it dominates the day's political and media conversation. These daily outbursts, though exhausting, have become so routine that it's easy to lose track of the staggering number of the President's statements that turn out not to be true. Cataloging and recording the number of lies and untruths has literally become a cottage industry for journalists. According to the fact checker, on September 7, President of the United States made 125 false or misleading statements in about 120 minutes of public remarks. That was the new single-day record. The day before, the President had made 74 false or misleading claims, many at a campaign rally in Montana. That day, perhaps not coincidentally, the New York Times had incensed the President by publishing an anonymous op-ed article purportedly by a senior administration official. And just a day earlier, excerpts from Bob Woodward's expose of the Trump White House fear had begun to circulate on the internet. According to the fact checker, in the President's first 100 days, he averaged just 4.9 false or misleading claims a day. The historic 5,000th false or misleading claim, for those who like statistics or milestones, was a tweet about the investigation led by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Quote, Russian collusion was just an excuse by the Democrats for having lost the election. Now, if you've had the sense in the last few months that the pace of all this is quickening, you would be right. Counting from the inauguration, according to the Post, he was averaging 8.3 false claims per day, but from September 4 to September 13, he reached 32 such falsehoods a day. Now, certainly, previous presidents and previous administrations have lied to the American people about issues big and small. To name a few, Woodrow Wilson ran for president on a platform of keeping the United States out of World War I. That didn't quite work out. The lies of Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy about the Vietnam War fill literally volumes of the Pentagon Papers. Bill Clinton did not have sex with that woman. But to be fair, in both its depth and breadth, the Trump administration's conduct is unprecedented in our history.
Now, I thought that was a really interesting commentary by Stephen Engelberg, and I'd really be interested to see how they calculate how Trump is lying in certain situations. But, you know, for the most part, what he's talking about is attacking the president, and this is nothing new. This is what we see every day in the news. The biggest thing I take away from Stephen Engelberg is, as an editor-in-chief of a news publication that to the average observer leans left, it definitely seems like it's an attempt to retain relevance, and we're seeing this across many media platforms. And what's going on right now is, for years they've been losing coverage, and with this president who they frame as attacking them, they can really position themselves to look like they're the advocate of the people. And I think it's questionable whether that's really the case.
So do you take issue with the fact that they have the fact-checking of, I just don't understand if you take issue with whether or not the facts that they're checking of what President Trump is saying is accurate or not?
Well, I think it's definitely not out of the realm of reason to say that Trump exaggerates, speaks in hyperbole to a decent amount. But when you're talking about actually running the numbers like that, and he talks about however many of his statements are lies within a certain grouping, I just really question the methodology of how they come to those numbers.
Well, I guess methodology aside, do you still think it's within the media's right to present these findings?
Oh, it's absolutely within the media's right. I question what their purpose of it is, though.
Well, I guess their purpose would be to bring it to light to people who might not know that he said X amount of falsehoods in X amount of time.
Yeah, I suppose the question would be how important are these falsehoods. You know, if we talk about certain things like, you know, maybe he misspoke about the Mueller investigation, something like this. Oftentimes he's referring to events that are actually occurring. He just refers to them in unorthodox ways that generally people, professionals, I guess we could say, don't agree with. But to the average person, they understand what he's saying.
Now, from what I understand from listening to him, being there at that conference too, of course he totally forgot that we had a president before Trump. And absolutely nothing was mentioned about Obama, nothing mentioned about his false statements, nothing mentioned about his dishonesty and about his absolute lying to the American public.
Well, Obama's not the president right now. President Trump is under pressure right now.
But what I'm
as the
saying
leader
is,
of the free country.
right? Yeah, Trump is the president. But how come he didn't do this when Obama was president? He could have done exactly the same thing and brought out all these falsehoods that Obama did. And as far as I'm concerned, Obama did far, far worse than Trump is doing. Not so much because I like Trump, it's just the fact that if you're going to do numbers, why isn't he looking at exactly what Obama did, how much he divided this country, and for no reason other than he had an agenda.
To be fair, Stephen Engelberg has talked about the fact that ProPublica did call out the Obama administration on quite a few topics.